My name is Rachel Martinez, and I'm 32 years old. For 15 years, I sacrificed everything to care for my dying mother while my brother lived his best life across the country. When she passed last month, he flew in for the funeral and said 5 words that shattered my world. "I'll handle Mom's estate." 3 weeks later, I discovered he'd bought a Tesla Model S with money that should have been mine. But what happened when I confronted him changed our family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the Martinez household in Phoenix, Arizona, meant understanding your place in the family hierarchy from an early age. My brother David was the golden child, 3 years older than me, charismatic, athletic, and blessed with the kind of easy charm that made adults instantly love him. He was the star quarterback in high school, earned a full scholarship to Stanford, and seemed destined for greatness from the moment he could walk. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the daughter who helped Mom with groceries and never caused trouble. While David was collecting trophies and accolades, I was collecting straight A's that nobody seemed to notice. Our mother, Carmen Martinez, worked double shifts as a nurse at Phoenix General Hospital to support us after our father left when I was 7. She adored David with the fierce pride of a mother whose son could do no wrong. She loved me too, but it was different. With me, love came with expectations of duty and sacrifice. Our father, Miguel, had been a construction foreman before his drinking problem cost him his job and eventually his family. The day he left, I remember Mom sitting at our kitchen table, still in her scrubs from work, crying into her hands while David threw a baseball against the garage door over and over, the sound echoing through our small house like gunshots. I was the one who brought her tissues and made her coffee. I was the one who helped her figure out how to pay the bills on a single income. David just kept throwing that ball. From that day forward, Mom worked herself to the bone to give us everything she thought we needed. She picked up extra shifts, worked holidays, and never complained about being tired. But her exhaustion showed in the way she moved, the slowness that crept into her steps, the way she'd sit down heavily after coming home from work and close her eyes for just a moment before starting dinner. David thrived, despite our father's absence, or maybe because of it. Mom poured all her dreams and ambitions into him, attending every game, every awards ceremony, every moment of triumph. She worked extra hours to pay for his sports equipment, his camps, his college application fees. When he got into Stanford, she cried tears of joy and called everyone she knew to share the news. I graduated as valedictorian from the same high school 2 years later. Mom was working a double shift that day and couldn't attend the ceremony. David was already settled in California, building his new life. I walked across that stage alone, accepted my diploma, and drove myself home to an empty house. That night, I made the decision that would define the next 15 years of my life. I would stay in Phoenix and attend Arizona State University. Someone needed to be there for Mom, and it clearly wasn't going to be David. College was supposed to be my escape, my chance to discover who I was beyond the responsible daughter role I'd inhabited for so long. I had dreams of studying journalism, maybe moving to New York or Los Angeles, becoming a writer for a major magazine. I had acceptance letters from Northwestern and Columbia sitting on my desk, scholarships that would have made it possible. But Mom needed me. She never asked directly, but I could see it in her eyes when we talked about my college plans. The fear of being alone, of having no family nearby, of growing older without anyone to share the burden. So I stayed. I chose Arizona State for its journalism program and its proximity to home. I told myself it was just as good that I could still achieve my dreams from Phoenix. I got a part-time job at a local newspaper, writing obituaries and covering high school sports. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I lived at home to save money, commuting to campus every day, coming home to help Mom with dinner and household chores. David called every Sunday during his freshman year at Stanford. The conversations followed a predictable pattern. He would tell us about his classes, his new friends, the amazing opportunities available to him. Mom would beam with pride, asking question after question about his life, hanging on every word. When the conversation turned to me, it was brief. How were my grades? Was I still working at the newspaper? David would make polite noises about my accomplishments, but I could hear the distraction in his voice, the eagerness to move on to more interesting topics. By his sophomore year, the Sunday calls became every other week. By junior year, they were monthly at best. Mom never complained about his reduced contact, but I noticed how she would check her phone more frequently on Sundays, hoping for his call. When it didn't come, she would find excuses for him. He's so busy with his studies, he's working so hard, he's building his future. Meanwhile, I was building my present around her needs. When she started having trouble sleeping, I researched remedies and bought her herbal teas. When she complained about back pain from long hours on her feet, I drove her to doctor's appointments and picked up her prescriptions. When she came home exhausted after particularly difficult shifts, I had dinner waiting and would listen to her stories about difficult patients or demanding doctors. David graduated from Stanford with a degree in computer science and immediately landed a job at a tech startup in San Francisco. The salary was impressive, the stock options promising, the lifestyle enviable. Mom flew out for his graduation, using vacation days she'd been saving for months and spending money she couldn't really afford on plane tickets and hotel rooms. She came back glowing with pride, showing everyone photos of David in his cap and gown, telling anyone who would listen about his job offer and his bright future. I graduated from Arizona State the same year, with my journalism degree and a job offer from the Arizona Republic, one of the state's largest newspapers. It was a good job, a solid start to a career I'd dreamed about for years. Mom was proud, but her pride was quieter, more practical. She worried about my salary, whether I'd be able to support myself, whether journalism was a stable enough career. The contrast in her reactions to our respective achievements was stark, though I don't think she realized it. David moved to San Francisco and threw himself into the tech world with the same enthusiasm he'd once brought to football. His social media was filled with photos from company parties, expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Napa Valley and Lake Tahoe. He was living the California dream, building wealth and connections in one of the most expensive cities in the world. His visits home became rare, reserved for major holidays when he could spare a few days from his busy schedule. I stayed in Phoenix, building my career one story at a time while building my life around Mom's needs. I moved out of the house when I was 25, renting a small apartment just 10 minutes away so I could still be available whenever she needed me. I covered city council meetings and school board disputes, wrote features about local businesses and community leaders. It was good work, meaningful work, but it wasn't the kind of career that would ever make me wealthy or famous. Mom entered her 50s dealing with the accumulated effects of decades of physical labor and emotional stress. Her back problems worsened, requiring physical therapy and eventual surgery. I drove her to every appointment, waited in hospital lobbies during procedures, helped her through recovery periods. David called when he could, expressing concern and offering to help financially, but he was 3 states away and building his career.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The day-to-day reality of caring for an aging parent fell to me by default. When Mom was 55, she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, a result of years of irregular eating, stress, and genetics. Managing the condition required significant lifestyle changes, regular monitoring, and frequent medical appointments. I became her advocate and coordinator, learning about insulin, carbohydrate counting, and blood sugar management. I reorganized her kitchen, shopped for appropriate foods, and called to remind her about medication schedules. David's career continued its upward trajectory. His startup was acquired by a larger tech company, and his stock options paid off handsomely. He bought a condo in the Mission District, traveled to Europe and Asia for both work and pleasure, and dated a series of successful, accomplished women. His Instagram feed was a highlight reel of an enviable life: wine tastings in Sonoma, skiing in Tahoe, tech conferences in exotic locations. When he visited Phoenix, which happened maybe twice a year, he seemed like a visitor from another world, sleek and polished and slightly out of place in our modest working-class reality. The irony wasn't lost on me that while David was accumulating wealth and experiences, I was accumulating something else entirely: an intimate knowledge of Mom's needs, preferences, fears, and dreams. I knew which foods triggered her blood sugar spikes, which doctors she trusted, which medications cause side effects. I knew she worried about being a burden, that she saved money obsessively despite having very little, that she still kept a photo of our father in her jewelry box even though she claimed to have forgotten him. During Mom's late 50s, her health problems multiplied. The diabetes led to circulation issues in her legs. The back problems required a second surgery that didn't heal properly. She developed high blood pressure and sleep apnea, requiring new medications and a CPAP machine that she hated but needed to use. Each new diagnosis meant more appointments, more adjustments to her daily routine, more coordination of care. I found myself becoming an expert in Medicare regulations, insurance networks, and patient advocacy. I learned to speak the language of doctors and insurance representatives, to push for appropriate care when bureaucracy got in the way, to research treatment options and second opinions. It wasn't the career I'd planned, but it was the role I inhabited with increasing expertise and dedication. My own life seemed to pause during these years. Relationships suffered because I was always available for Mom's crises, but rarely available for spontaneous plans or romantic getaways. Career opportunities passed by because I couldn't relocate or travel extensively. Friends moved away or moved on, building families and pursuing dreams while I managed doctor's appointments and prescription refills. David's success story continued. He was promoted to senior positions, earned significant bonuses, and invested wisely in real estate and stocks. He bought a house in Marin County with panoramic views of San Francisco Bay, a place so beautiful and expensive it seemed like something from a movie. When he showed us photos during his rare visits, Mom would marvel at his achievements, touching the images on his phone as if she could somehow transmit her pride through the screen. I tried not to feel bitter about the choices I'd made. I genuinely loved Mom and wanted to care for her. I found satisfaction in my work at the newspaper, even if it wasn't the glamorous career I'd once imagined. I built meaningful friendships with colleagues and maintained close relationships with a small circle of loyal friends who understood my family obligations. But sometimes, late at night when I was researching Mom's latest health concern, or sitting in another waiting room, I wondered what my life might have looked like if I'd made different choices. When Mom turned 60, her kidney function began declining, a complication of her diabetes that her doctors had warned us might develop. The nephrologist explained that she would eventually need dialysis, possibly a kidney transplant, and that her life expectancy was now measured in years rather than decades. I remember sitting in that sterile office, holding Mom's hand while she absorbed this news with the stoic acceptance she'd developed over years of accumulating health problems. That evening, I called David to share the diagnosis. He was at a company retreat in Cabo, and I could hear laughter and music in the background when he answered. The contrast between his world and mine had never felt more stark. He expressed appropriate concern and asked good questions about treatment options and prognosis. He offered to fly home for the next appointment, but we both knew he wouldn't follow through. His life was too full, too important, too far away from the daily reality of managing chronic illness. The kidney disease progressed slowly but relentlessly over the next 2 years. Mom started dialysis 3 times a week, a schedule that consumed entire days and left her exhausted for hours afterward. I rearranged my work schedule to drive her to appointments, sitting in the dialysis center for 4 hours at a time while machines cleaned her blood. The other patients became familiar faces, and their family members became my informal support network, all of us united in the strange intimacy of caring for someone whose body was failing. David visited more frequently during this period, flying in every few months for long weekends that allowed him to spend quality time with Mom without dealing with the daily grind of medical care. He was wonderful during these visits, charming and attentive, bringing gifts and telling stories that made Mom laugh. He would take her to nice restaurants on days when she felt well enough, hire cleaning services to deep clean her house, and arrange for grocery deliveries to make her life easier. His gestures were generous and thoughtful, but they were also temporary. When he flew back to San Francisco, the daily reality of Mom's care returned to my shoulders. I began working more freelance assignments to supplement my newspaper salary, taking on projects I could do from home during the long hours I spent with Mom. I wrote marketing copy for local businesses, edited technical documents, and contributed articles to online publications. The extra income was necessary because my expenses had increased significantly. Even with Medicare, Mom's medical costs were substantial, and I frequently helped cover copays, prescriptions, and medical equipment that insurance didn't fully cover. My own health began suffering from the stress and irregular schedule. I gained weight from eating hospital cafeteria food and fast food grabbed between appointments. I developed chronic headaches and insomnia, symptoms of stress that I didn't have time to address properly. My annual physical revealed elevated blood pressure and cholesterol levels, early warning signs that I was following in Mom's footsteps toward health problems created by lifestyle and stress. During Mom's dialysis sessions, I would sit in the waiting area working on my laptop, writing articles about local politics or business developments, while listening to the sounds of life-sustaining medical equipment in the next room. Other family members would come and go, some staying for entire sessions like me, others dropping off patients and returning hours later. I noticed that most of the dedicated caregivers were women, daughters and wives, who had reorganized their lives around someone else's medical needs. David's career reached new heights during Mom's sickest period. He was promoted to vice president of product development at his company, earning a salary that exceeded what Mom and I made combined. He bought a second property, a cabin in Lake Tahoe that he used for weekend getaways and hosted company executives. His social media posts showed a life of increasing luxury and sophistication, wine collections and art purchases and vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. The contrast between our circumstances wasn't lost on Mom, though she never complained about it directly. Sometimes she would mention David's success with a mixture of pride and wistfulness, commenting on photos of his beautiful homes or exotic travels. She never expressed resentment about his absence during her illness, but I could see the longing in her eyes when she talked about him, the desire to be part of his wonderful life instead of confined to dialysis centers and doctors' offices. When Mom was 63, her doctors added her to the kidney transplant waiting list. The process was complicated and invasive, requiring extensive testing to determine her eligibility and ongoing monitoring to ensure she remained a viable candidate. I became fluent in the language of organ transplantation, learning about compatibility testing, wait times, and post-transplant care requirements. David flew in for the initial consultation, asked intelligent questions, and promised to be available if she received a transplant call. The waiting period was emotionally exhausting. Every time Mom's phone rang, we both wondered if it might be the call that would change everything. She carried a hospital bag with her everywhere, packed with medications and personal items in case she needed to rush to surgery. I developed a hypervigilance about my own phone, afraid to miss a call that might mean Mom needed me immediately. David remained on standby, ready to fly home at a moment's notice. But as months passed without a call, his attention inevitably returned to his busy life in California. Mom's condition continued deteriorating while we waited. The dialysis became less effective, and she developed complications that required additional treatments and hospitalizations. I took family medical leave from the newspaper to care for her full-time, a decision that impacted my career but felt like the only responsible choice. My savings account dwindled as I covered both her expenses and mine on reduced income. David offered financial help during this period, sending checks for Mom's medical bills and offering to cover any expenses I couldn't handle. I was grateful for his generosity, but also aware that money was his primary contribution to Mom's care. He could write checks from San Francisco, but he couldn't sit with her during dialysis sessions, drive her to emergency room visits at 3 a.m, or help her manage the daily indignities of chronic illness. The kidney transplant call finally came on a Tuesday afternoon in March when Mom was 64. I was grocery shopping when my phone rang, and I abandoned a full cart in the middle of the produce section to race to Mom's house. We had rehearsed this scenario dozens of times, but the reality was still overwhelming. While Mom showered and gathered her things, I called David, reaching him in a meeting in Seattle where he was traveling for work. He promised to catch the next flight to Phoenix and meet us at the hospital. The transplant surgery lasted 8 hours. I spent most of that time in the surgical waiting room, drinking bad coffee and updating family members and friends via text messages. David arrived halfway through the surgery, having caught a red-eye flight and taken a taxi directly from the airport. For once, we were both there, both equally anxious and hopeful, both focused entirely on Mom's well-being. The surgery was successful, but the recovery was long and complicated. Mom spent 3 weeks in the hospital dealing with rejection episodes and infection risks. I practically lived at the hospital during this period, sleeping in chairs, eating cafeteria food, and monitoring her progress with the dedication of a medical professional. David stayed for the first week, then returned to San Francisco for work commitments, visiting again during weekends when his schedule allowed. The post-transplant period required intensive medical management and lifestyle changes. Mom needed to take immunosuppressive medications for the rest of her life, attend frequent medical appointments, and avoid exposure to infections and other health risks. I became her medication coordinator, appointment scheduler, and infection prevention specialist. My world contracted even further around her needs, but for the first time in years, there was hope that she might have many good years ahead. David's life continued its upward trajectory even as Mom's health stabilized. He was recruited by a larger tech company with an even more impressive salary and stock package. He sold his San Francisco properties at significant profits and bought an even more spectacular house in Palo Alto, complete with a home office, wine cellar, and infinity pool. His Instagram posts showed a life of increasing luxury, expensive dinners and exotic vacations, and professional achievements that seemed to compound monthly. For 2 years after the transplant, Mom's health was better than it had been in decades. Her energy returned, her appetite improved, and she was able to enjoy activities that had been impossible during the dialysis years. We took short trips together, visited museums and restaurants, and attended family celebrations that she'd missed during her sickest period. I was able to return to work part-time at the newspaper, though I remained her primary caregiver and medical coordinator. David visited more frequently during this period, perhaps recognizing that Mom's improved health created opportunities for quality time that might not last forever. He was generous with his time and money during these visits, taking Mom to nice hotels for weekend getaways and treating her to experiences she'd never been able to afford. His attention during these visits was complete and genuine, and Mom treasured every moment of his company. But the kidney transplant, successful as it was, couldn't solve all of Mom's health problems. The immunosuppressive medications increased her susceptibility to infections and made her existing health conditions more difficult to manage. She developed skin cancer that required several surgeries, pneumonia that led to extended hospitalizations, and blood pressure problems that were harder to control with her limited medication options. When Mom was 67, routine tests revealed that the transplanted kidney was beginning to fail. The rejection was slow and treatable for a while, but her doctors were honest about the long-term prognosis. She might have months or years of good function, but she would eventually need dialysis again or another transplant. At her age, and with her multiple health conditions, another transplant was unlikely to be an option. I absorbed this news with the weary acceptance of someone who had been managing medical crises for years. David received the news during a phone call while he was at a company conference in Tokyo. He expressed appropriate concern and promised to visit soon, but I could hear the distance in his voice, both geographical and emotional. He lived in a world where problems were solved with money, innovation, and determination. Mom's failing kidney was a problem that couldn't be solved with any of those tools. The final 2 years of Mom's life were a slow decline, punctuated by medical crises and brief periods of stability. She returned to dialysis, but her body didn't respond as well as it had before the transplant. She developed complications that required frequent hospitalizations and increasingly complex medical management. I took another leave of absence from work, this time without pay, to provide the around-the-clock care she needed. David's visits became more frequent during this period, but they also became more emotionally charged. I think he was beginning to realize that Mom's time was limited and that his window for meaningful connection was closing. He would arrive from California with expensive gifts and elaborate plans for activities that Mom was too sick to enjoy. His frustration with her limitations was visible, though he tried to hide it. He was used to solving problems and creating positive outcomes, but he couldn't solve the problem of Mom's mortality. I found myself serving as a buffer between David's expectations and Mom's reality. I would suggest less ambitious activities, explain why certain plans weren't feasible, and help him adjust his visits to match Mom's energy levels and medical needs. It was exhausting work, managing both Mom's care and David's emotions, but I was determined to protect Mom from any additional stress during her final months. The last 6 months were particularly difficult. Mom required help with basic activities like bathing and dressing. She needed assistance managing her medications and medical equipment. She couldn't drive or prepare meals safely. I moved back into her house to provide around-the-clock care, sleeping on the couch in the living room so I could hear if she needed help during the night. David offered multiple times to hire professional caregivers or move Mom to an assisted living facility where she could receive expert care. His suggestions were practical and well-intentioned, but Mom wanted to stay in her own home, surrounded by familiar things and cared for by family. I supported her choice, even though it meant sacrificing what remained of my own independence and career prospects. During Mom's final weeks, David took an extended leave from work to spend time with her. For once, we were both there, both equally present for her care. Those weeks were emotionally intense, filled with difficult conversations about end-of-life preferences and bittersweet moments of connection. David showed a tenderness I hadn't seen from him in years, holding Mom's hand during difficult moments and telling her stories about his life that he'd never shared before. Mom died on a quiet Thursday morning in November, with both David and me present. She had been unconscious for 2 days, her breathing becoming increasingly labored, despite the medications designed to keep her comfortable. When her breathing finally stopped, David and I sat on either side of her bed holding her hands and crying together for the first time since we were children. The grief was overwhelming, but it was complicated by the relief I felt that her suffering was finally over. For 15 years, I had organized my life around her needs, and suddenly those needs no longer existed. I felt unmoored, uncertain of my identity, without the role of caregiver that had defined me for so long. David seemed equally lost, perhaps realizing for the first time how much of his relationship with Mom had been mediated through my caregiving and coordination. The day after Mom's death, David and I sat in her kitchen, surrounded by medical equipment and pill organizers that were no longer needed, planning her funeral and beginning to think about the practical matters that follow death. The house felt empty without her presence, but also cluttered with the accumulated artifacts of long illness: oxygen tanks and hospital beds, shower chairs and medication schedules, all the tools that had kept her alive and comfortable during her final years. David took charge of the funeral arrangements with his characteristic efficiency and attention to detail. He hired a professional funeral director, arranged for flowers and catering, and coordinated with family members and friends who wanted to pay their respects. His organizational skills and financial resources ensured that Mom received a beautiful send-off, exactly the kind of dignified ceremony she would have wanted. At the funeral, people shared memories of Mom's kindness, her work ethic, and her devotion to her family. Many mentioned her pride in David's success and her gratitude for my care during her illness. I gave a eulogy that focused on her strength and resilience, her ability to find joy despite difficult circumstances, and her love for both of her children. David spoke about her sacrifices and dreams, her support for his education and career, and his regret that he hadn't spent more time with her during her final years. After the funeral reception, David and I returned to Mom's house to begin the overwhelming task of sorting through her belongings. The house was filled with the accumulation of a lifetime: photographs and furniture, clothing and books, kitchen appliances, and holiday decorations. Each item held memories and required decisions about what to keep, what to donate, and what to discard. We worked together for several days, sharing stories about items we discovered and making decisions about family heirlooms and sentimental objects. David was surprisingly emotional during this process, holding on to items that reminded him of childhood memories or Mom's love. I found myself serving as the repository of institutional memory, able to explain the significance of various objects and help David understand what had been important to Mom during her final years. On the third day of sorting, David brought up the subject I had been dreading: Mom's estate and financial affairs. He had always been the one with business expertise and financial sophistication, while I had focused on medical and caregiving responsibilities. It seemed natural that he would take the lead in settling her affairs, and I was grateful for his willingness to handle the complex paperwork and legal requirements. "I'll handle Mom's estate," he said, sitting at her kitchen table with a stack of financial documents spread before him. "You've done enough, Rachel. You've given 15 years of your life to taking care of her. Let me take care of this business side of things." I felt a wave of relief at his offer. The prospect of navigating probate proceedings, tax obligations, and asset distribution felt overwhelming after months of intensive caregiving. I trusted David's business judgment and financial expertise. He had managed his own wealth successfully for years, and he understood legal and financial matters that were foreign to me. "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful. I wouldn't even know where to start with all of this. David gathered Mom's important papers, bank statements, insurance policies, property deeds, and investment account statements. He explained that he would work with Mom's attorney to file the necessary paperwork and ensure that everything was handled properly according to Arizona state law. He estimated that the process would take several months, but promised to keep me informed about important developments. I returned to my own apartment, emotionally and physically exhausted from months of intensive caregiving, followed by the funeral and estate sorting. My leave of absence from the newspaper was ending, and I needed to decide whether to return to work or look for other opportunities. My savings were depleted from the period when I'd worked reduced hours, and I needed income to rebuild my financial stability. The newspaper was understanding about my situation and offered me a part-time position that would allow me to ease back into work while I grieved and reorganized my life. I accepted the offer, grateful for the flexibility and the familiar routine of reporting and writing. Work provided a welcome distraction from grief and an opportunity to rebuild my professional identity beyond the caregiver role I'd inhabited for so long. David returned to San Francisco in his high-pressure job, diving back into work with the intensity of someone trying to outrun grief. We talked regularly during the weeks following the funeral, checking in on each other's emotional state and discussing practical matters related to Mom's estate. He seemed to be handling the legal and financial aspects efficiently, working with Mom's attorney and financial advisors to ensure everything was settled properly. About 6 weeks after Mom's death, David called with an update on the estate proceedings. The probate process was moving smoothly, he reported, and most of Mom's assets had been located and valued. There were no major surprises or complications. Her house, which had been paid off years earlier, was worth about $180,000 in the current market. Her savings and investment accounts totaled another $45,000. After paying final medical bills, funeral expenses, and legal fees, the estate would be worth approximately $200,000. According to Mom's will, which she had updated several years earlier with the help of her attorney, David and I were equal beneficiaries of her estate. After all expenses were paid, we would each inherit approximately $100,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a significant sum that could help me rebuild my savings and perhaps make a down payment on a house of my own. I felt complicated emotions about the inheritance. On one hand, I was grateful for Mom's foresight in accumulating savings despite her modest income and expensive medical bills. On the other hand, I couldn't help thinking about the irony that David, who had built substantial wealth through his tech career, would receive the same inheritance as me, despite my years of unpaid caregiving and financial sacrifice. But those feelings seemed petty and ungrateful. Mom had chosen to divide her estate equally between her children, and that decision reflected her love for both of us, regardless of our different circumstances. David had contributed to Mom's care in his own way, through financial support and emotional presence during his visits. The inheritance wasn't payment for caregiving services. It was a final expression of Mom's love and her desire to provide for both of her children's futures. David assured me that he would have everything finalized within the next month or two. He was working with the attorney to pay all outstanding bills, file the necessary tax returns, and prepare for the distribution of assets. He suggested that we could close on the house sale quickly, since it was in good condition and the Phoenix real estate market was strong. The cash from the house sale, combined with Mom's other assets, would allow for swift distribution of our inheritances. I felt a sense of closure knowing that Mom's affairs were being handled competently, and that I would soon receive the inheritance she had intended for me. The money would allow me to take some time to grieve properly, perhaps travel for the first time in years, and make plans for my future without the constant pressure of caregiving responsibilities. It felt like Mom's final gift to me, a chance to restart my life after 15 years of service to hers. 3 weeks later, I was scrolling through social media during my lunch break when I saw something that made my blood run cold. David had posted a photo of himself standing next to a gleaming white Tesla Model S, keys in his hand, with a caption that read, "New ride, sometimes you have to treat yourself. Life is short. #Tesla life, #living my best life." The car was beautiful, clearly expensive, and completely inappropriate given that our mother had died less than 3 months earlier. But what made the post truly shocking was the timing. David was supposed to be handling Mom's estate, distributing her assets, and ensuring that I received my inheritance. Instead, he was apparently spending money on luxury purchases. My hands shook as I called his number, my mind racing with questions and growing dread. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later with the same result. I sent a text message asking him to call me about an urgent estate matter but received no response. By the end of the workday, I was consumed with anxiety and suspicion. That evening, I drove to Mom's house, which was supposed to be in the process of being sold. A for sale sign stood in the front yard, but when I peeked through the windows, the house appeared to still contain most of Mom's furniture and belongings. If David was handling the estate properly, the house should have been cleared out and prepared for showing to potential buyers. I called Mom's attorney, Margaret Chen, the next morning to ask about the status of the estate proceedings. Margaret seemed surprised by my call and somewhat evasive in her responses. She confirmed that David had been in contact with her office but suggested that I direct my questions to him directly. When I pressed for specific information about probate filings and asset distribution, she became more guarded, citing client confidentiality and suggesting that family members should coordinate their communications about estate matters. The conversation left me more concerned than reassured. If everything was proceeding normally, why wouldn't Margaret be able to provide basic status updates? Why did she seem uncomfortable discussing the estate with me, when I was clearly identified as an ASAC, equal beneficiary in Mom's will? I spent the weekend in a state of growing anxiety, trying to reach David and getting no response to my calls or text messages. His social media posts showed him enjoying an expensive dinner at a San Francisco restaurant, posting photos of wine and food that probably cost more than I made in a week. The Tesla photo had generated dozens of congratulatory comments from his friends and colleagues, people who had no idea that his mother had recently died and left a modest estate that was supposed to be divided between her 2 children. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to Margaret Chen's law office without an appointment. I sat in the waiting room until she could see me, determined to get answers about Mom's estate regardless of how uncomfortable the conversation might be. Margaret was professional but clearly uncomfortable when I explained my concerns. She confirmed that David had been designated as the executor of Mom's estate, a responsibility that gave him authority to manage the probate process and asset distribution. However, she was reluctant to provide specific details about what actions he had taken or what the current status of various estate assets might be. "I understand your concerns," Margaret said carefully, "but as executor, your brother has the legal authority to manage the estate proceedings. If you have questions about his decisions or actions, you should address them with him directly." "But I am a beneficiary," I insisted. "Don't I have rights to information about the estate's assets and distribution timeline?" Margaret acknowledged that beneficiaries had certain rights to information, but explained that those rights were generally exercised through communication with the executor rather than directly with the attorney. She suggested that I continue trying to reach David and request a formal accounting of estate assets and expenses. The conversation was frustrating and alarming. If David was handling the estate properly, why was he avoiding my calls? Why couldn't the attorney provide basic information about the status of proceedings? And most importantly, how had David purchased an expensive car when he was supposed to be preserving estate assets for distribution? I left Margaret's office with a growing certainty that something was seriously wrong. That afternoon, I hired my own attorney, Maria Rodriguez, who specialized in estate law and probate disputes. Maria listened to my concerns with the professional attention of someone who had handled similar situations before. "The timing of your brother's car purchase is certainly suspicious," Maria said after reviewing the basic facts of my situation. "If he used estate assets to buy personal items, that would constitute a serious breach of his fiduciary duties as executor." Maria outlined several potential courses of action, each with different costs, timelines, and likelihood of success. I could request a formal accounting from David as executor, demanding detailed documentation of all estate transactions and expenses. If he refused or provided inadequate information, I could petition the probate court to compel him to provide proper accounting or even remove him as executor for breach of fiduciary duty. The legal process would be expensive and time-consuming, potentially taking months or years to resolve completely. But if David had indeed misappropriated estate assets, I might be able to recover not only my rightful inheritance, but also additional damages and attorney fees. The prospect of a legal battle with my brother was emotionally devastating, but the alternative was allowing him to steal money that Mom had intended for both of us. That evening, I finally received a response to my numerous attempts to contact David. Instead of a phone call, he sent a brief text message. "Sorry, I've been hard to reach. Work has been crazy. Everything with the estate is moving along fine. We'll call you soon to discuss details." The message was casual and dismissive, completely inadequate given my legitimate concerns about estate management and his recent expensive purchase. I immediately called his number, but once again reached voicemail. This time I left a detailed message explaining my concerns about the Tesla purchase and demanding immediate information about the estate's current status and asset distribution timeline. I also sent a formal text message requesting a complete accounting of estate assets, expenses, and transactions. I made it clear that I was aware of my rights as a beneficiary and expected full transparency about his management of Mom's estate. The message was firm but professional, giving him an opportunity to explain the situation before I escalated to legal action. David's response came 2 hours later via text. "Rachel, I think you're overreacting. The car purchase has nothing to do with Mom's estate. I've been working hard and decided to treat myself. The estate is being handled properly, and you'll get your inheritance when everything is finalized. Please trust me to handle this correctly." The response was infuriating in its dismissiveness and obvious deception. A Tesla Model S cost at least $80,000, far more than David's annual salary despite his success in tech. Even with his stock options and bonuses, such a purchase represented a significant expenditure that would require either substantial savings or external financing. The timing, just weeks after gaining access to Mom's estate assets, was far too coincidental to ignore. I showed David's text messages to Maria the next morning, and her expression grew increasingly grim as she read his responses. His refusal to provide proper accounting and his dismissive attitude toward my legitimate concerns were red flags that suggested serious misconduct in his role as executor. "We need to act quickly," Maria advised. "If your brother is misappropriating estate assets, delay only gives him more time to hide evidence or spend more money. I recommend filing an emergency petition with the probate court requesting immediate accounting and potentially seeking his removal as executor." Quote, "The decision to pursue legal action against David felt like crossing a bridge I could never uncross. Once I filed court papers challenging his management of Mom's estate, our relationship would be permanently damaged regardless of the outcome. But I couldn't allow sentiment to override my responsibility to protect Mom's final wishes and my own financial future." Maria prepared the necessary paperwork while I gathered documentation to support my case. I collected screenshots of David's social media posts showing the Tesla purchase and expensive lifestyle, copies of our text message exchanges about the estate, and records of my attempts to get information from Mom's attorney. I also documented my financial situation, showing how I had depleted my savings during Mom's final years, and explaining why the inheritance was crucial to my future stability. The petition requested several forms of relief from the probate court. First, we asked for an immediate and complete accounting of all estate assets, transactions, and expenses since Mom's death. Second, we requested an investigation into David's use of estate funds for personal purchases, specifically the Tesla acquisition. Third, we asked the court to consider removing David as executor and appointing a neutral third party to manage the estate distribution. Filing the petition required paying substantial court fees that I could barely afford given my depleted finances. Maria agreed to work on a contingency basis, meaning I wouldn't pay her fees unless we recovered money from the estate. It was a risk for both of us, but she seemed confident that the evidence suggested clear misconduct that the court would address. The court papers were served on David, at his San Francisco address, by a professional process server. According to the service requirements, he had 30 days to respond to the petition and provide the requested accounting information. I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination as we waited for his response, knowing that this legal action would force him to either justify his conduct or face serious consequences. David's response came not through the legal system, but through an angry phone call 3 days after being served with court papers. I was at work when my phone rang, and his voice was tight with fury when I answered. "What the hell is this, Rachel?" he demanded without preamble. "You're suing me? Your own brother? After everything I've done for this family?" "I asked you repeatedly for information about the estate," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You've been avoiding my calls and refusing to provide proper accounting. The Tesla purchase was the final straw." "The Tesla has nothing to do with Mom's estate," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "I've been working incredible hours, I got a huge bonus, and I decided to buy myself something nice. There's nothing wrong with that." "Then prove it," I challenged. "Show me the estate accounting. Show me bank statements proving the car was purchased with your own money. If everything is legitimate, the court proceedings will vindicate you." There was a long pause before David spoke again, and when he did, his tone had shifted from anger to something more calculated. "You don't understand how complicated estate management is, Rachel. There are taxes to consider, timing issues with asset liquidation, market conditions affecting the house sale. I've been working with professionals to maximize the estate's value for both of us." "Then you should have no problem providing documentation to prove that," I said. "The court is simply asking for the same accounting information that any beneficiary has the right to request." "This is going to cost both of us thousands of dollars in attorney fees," David warned. "Money that could be going to you as part of your inheritance. Is that really what you want? To waste Mom's money on lawyers because you don't trust me?" The manipulation in his argument was obvious, but still emotionally effective. He was trying to make me feel guilty for protecting my own interests, framing my legitimate concerns as family disloyalty and financial waste. But his refusal to simply provide the requested information only reinforced my suspicion that he had something significant to hide. "I want what Mom intended for me to have," I said firmly. "If you've been managing the estate properly, the accounting will show that, and we can resolve this quickly. If you haven't, then I'm glad I took action to protect your wishes." David hung up without responding to my final statement, leaving me shaken but more determined than ever to pursue the legal case. His angry reaction and continued refusal to provide straightforward documentation only strengthened my conviction that he had misappropriated estate funds. Over the following weeks, David's attorney filed a response to our petition that was long on legal technicalities, but short on actual explanations for his conduct. The response argued that as executor, David had broad discretion in managing estate assets, and that beneficiaries should trust his judgment rather than second-guessing his decisions. It characterized my concerns as premature and unreasonable, suggesting that I was being impatient about the normal timeline for estate distribution. Notably absent from David's response was any documentation about estate assets, expenses, or the source of funding for his Tesla purchase. His attorney requested additional time to prepare a proper accounting, claiming that estate records needed to be organized and verified before they could be submitted to the court. Maria was skeptical about the delay request, pointing out that competent executors maintain organized records throughout the estate administration process rather than scrambling to assemble documentation only when legally compelled. The request for additional time suggested either incompetent record-keeping or deliberate obfuscation of problematic transactions. The court granted David's attorney a 60-day extension to provide the requested accounting, but warned that any further delays would be viewed unfavorably. The judge also appointed a neutral accountant to review David's eventual submission and verify its accuracy and completeness. This appointment was a positive development for our case, ensuring that any accounting David provided would be subject to professional scrutiny. During the waiting period, I tried to gather additional information about Mom's estate from other sources. I contacted her bank to request information about account activity following her death, but was told that only the designated executor could access such records. I drove by Mom's house periodically and noticed that it remained unsold and still contained most of her belongings, raising questions about David's claims regarding active efforts to liquidate estate assets. I also researched Tesla pricing and financing options to understand how David might have afforded such an expensive vehicle. The Model S he had posted on social media typically sold for between $75,000 and $90,000, depending on options and trim level. Even with David's substantial tech salary and bonuses, such a purchase would represent a significant financial commitment that would normally require either substantial savings or financing arrangements. The research revealed that Tesla offered financing options for qualified buyers, but even with good credit, the monthly payments on such an expensive vehicle would be substantial. David's social media posts also showed other expensive purchases around the same time period: luxury vacations, expensive dinners, and designer clothing that suggested a pattern of increased spending following Mom's death. 6 weeks into the court-ordered accounting period, Maria received an unexpected call from David's attorney requesting a settlement conference. The attorney suggested that both parties might benefit from resolving the dispute privately, rather than continuing with expensive and time-consuming litigation. While he didn't admit any wrongdoing on David's part, he indicated that David might be willing to discuss accelerated distribution of estate assets to resolve my concerns. The settlement overture was encouraging because it suggested that David's legal team recognized weaknesses in their position. If David had been managing the estate properly and had legitimate explanations for all his actions, there would be no reason to avoid court proceedings that would vindicate his conduct. The willingness to negotiate implied that he had something to hide and preferred to resolve the matter privately rather than face court scrutiny. Maria and I agreed to participate in a settlement conference, but we prepared carefully to ensure that any agreement would adequately protect my interests. We developed a list of non-negotiable demands: complete accounting of all estate transactions, immediate repayment of any misappropriated funds, and distribution of my full inheritance as specified in Mom's will. We also reserved the right to resume court proceedings if David's accounting revealed additional misconduct or if he failed to fulfill any settlement obligations. The settlement conference was held via video call, with both attorneys present along with David and me. It was the first time I had seen David since Mom's funeral, and he looked uncomfortable and defensive throughout the proceedings. His usual confidence and charm were notably absent, replaced by a tension that suggested he was under considerable stress. David's attorney began by reiterating their position that all estate management had been proper, and that my concerns were based on misunderstandings about normal estate administration procedures. However, he acknowledged that family relationships were important, and that David was willing to make certain accommodations to preserve family harmony and avoid further legal expenses. My client is prepared to provide a complete accounting of estate assets and transactions, the attorney announced, and to accelerate the distribution process to ensure that Ms. Martinez receives her inheritance within 30 days, rather than waiting for the normal conclusion of probate proceedings. The offer sounded reasonable on its surface, but Maria and I had prepared for exactly this type of proposal. The critical question wasn't whether David would provide accounting information eventually, but whether that accounting would reveal problematic transactions that had already occurred. "We appreciate your client's willingness to expedite distribution," Maria responded, "but our primary concern remains the source of funding for the Tesla purchase and any other personal expenses that may have been paid from estate assets. Any settlement must include full restitution for misappropriated funds, plus interest and penalties." David's attorney looked uncomfortable and glanced at his client before responding. "My client maintains that no estate funds were used for personal purchases. The vehicle in question was purchased using personal savings and financing arrangements unrelated to the estate. Then providing documentation to prove that should be straightforward," Maria replied. "We would need to see bank records showing the source of the down payment, financing agreements for any borrowed amounts, and verification that no estate assets were used directly or indirectly to fund the purchase." The room fell silent as David and his attorney conferred in whispered conversation. I could see David becoming increasingly agitated as they discussed options, and his attorney's expression grew more grim as their conversation continued. Finally, David spoke directly for the first time during the conference. "Look, Rachel, I may have made some mistakes in managing the estate assets. Things got complicated with the house sale timeline and some unexpected expenses. I might have temporarily borrowed against estate funds for personal needs. but I always intended to pay everything back before final distribution. The admission was exactly what Maria and I had hoped to hear, though David's characterization of his actions as temporary borrowing rather than theft was clearly intended to minimize the severity of his misconduct. His acknowledgement that he had used estate funds for personal purposes validated our legal case and put us in a strong position to negotiate favorable settlement terms. "How much money are we talking about?" Maria asked directly. David looked even more uncomfortable as he answered. The Tesla down payment was $25,000. There were also some other expenses, maybe $15,000 more, but I can pay it all back immediately. I never intended to actually take money from Rachel's inheritance. $40,000. David had spent $40,000 of Mom's estate on personal purchases, money that should have been preserved for distribution to both of us according to her will. The amount represented nearly 20% of the total estate value and a significant portion of my expected inheritance. $40,000 plus interest. Maria corrected. If Mr. Martinez had invested those funds conservatively from the time of misappropriation, the estate would have earned additional returns that must also be restored. David's attorney attempted to negotiate the interest calculation, but Maria was firm that full restitution required compensation for lost investment returns as well as the principal amount. We eventually agreed on a formula that would add approximately $3,000 to David's repayment obligation. The settlement agreement required David to transfer $43,000 into the estate account within 10 business days, provide complete documentation of all estate transactions since Mom's death, and distribute my full inheritance of approximately $100,000 within 30 days. In exchange, I would withdraw the court petition and agree not to pursue additional legal action related to his estate management. David also agreed to resign as executor and allow a neutral third party to complete the estate administration and house sale. This provision was important because it removed any opportunity for additional misconduct and ensured that remaining estate assets would be managed properly. As we finalized the settlement terms, David made one last attempt at manipulation. "I hope you realize that this whole legal battle has damaged our relationship permanently, Rachel. We're the only family we have left, and you've chosen money over family loyalty." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be emotionally effective. Our relationship would indeed be permanently changed by his theft and my legal response to it. But his attempt to frame the situation as my choice between money and family was fundamentally dishonest. "You're right that this has damaged our relationship," I replied. "But the damage was caused by your decision to steal from Mom's estate, not by my decision to stop you. I didn't choose money over family. You chose money over honesty, and I chose to protect Mom's final wishes." David didn't respond to my statement, and the settlement conference concluded with signatures on legal documents that would hopefully resolve the matter permanently. I felt emotionally drained but vindicated by the outcome. While I regretted the necessity of legal action against my brother, I was satisfied that I had protected both Mom's intentions and my own financial future. The 10 days following the settlement conference were tense as we waited to see whether David would fulfill his repayment obligations. Maria had built penalties into the agreement for any delays or defaults, but there was always the possibility that David might try to renegotiate or simply refuse to pay. On the 9th day, Maria called to confirm that the full $43,000 had been transferred into the estate account, along with complete documentation of David's estate management activities. The accounting revealed the full extent of his misconduct, showing not only the Tesla down payment and other personal expenses I had discovered, but additional smaller transactions that totaled nearly $50,000 in misappropriated funds. David had apparently been treating the estate account as his personal checking account since shortly after Mom's death, paying for vacations, expensive dinners, designer clothing, and even routine personal expenses like gym memberships and streaming services. The pattern suggested not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a systematic appropriation of estate assets for his personal benefit. The documentation also revealed that David had made no meaningful progress towards selling Mom's house or liquidating other estate assets. He had listed the house with a realtor but had priced it significantly above market value, ensuring that it would remain unsold while he continued to access estate funds for personal use. His plan appeared to be stringing out the estate administration process indefinitely, while using Mom's money to fund his lifestyle. Most shocking was the discovery that David had opened a high-yield investment account using estate funds and had been earning interest on Mom's money while telling me that asset liquidation was complicated and time-consuming. He had essentially been using the estate as his personal bank while denying me access to my inheritance for months. The additional misappropriated funds beyond what David had admitted during settlement negotiations gave us legal grounds to demand further restitution, but Maria advised against reopening the settlement unless I was prepared for extended litigation. David had fulfilled his settlement obligations, and pursuing additional claims would require proving that his failure to disclose the full extent of his misconduct constituted fraud rather than simple underestimation. I decided to accept the settlement as agreed rather than risk additional legal expenses and delays. The important victory was stopping David's theft and recovering the funds he had admitted taking. The additional $5,000 in undisclosed misappropriation was disappointing, but not worth the emotional and financial cost of continued litigation. Within 30 days of the settlement, I received my full inheritance of approximately $100,000, funds that David had been required to restore to the Boss P. Prov estate account along with interest and penalties. The money represented financial security I hadn't experienced in years, but it also carried the emotional weight of representing Mom's final gift and the cost of discovering my brother's betrayal. The house sale proceeded quickly once a competent realtor took over the process, with the property selling for close to its appraised value within 6 weeks of being properly priced and marketed. David's portion of the sale proceeds was distributed to him according to the will's terms, though he received slightly less than originally anticipated due to the restitution payments and additional legal expenses. Our final communication was a brief email exchange confirming that all settlement obligations had been fulfilled and that the estate administration was complete. David made no apology for his conduct and no acknowledgement that he had betrayed both Mom's trust and my own. His final message simply stated that he hoped we could, quote, move forward as a family, despite the unfortunate misunderstanding about estate management. The characterization of systematic theft as a misunderstanding was typical of David's inability to accept responsibility for his actions. Even after being caught and forced to make restitution, he couldn't acknowledge that he had done anything fundamentally wrong. His narcissism and sense of entitlement remained intact, despite the legal and financial consequences of his misconduct. I blocked David's number and social media accounts after receiving his final message, recognizing that any future contact would likely involve either additional manipulation or attempts to rebuild a relationship without acknowledging the harm he had caused. The brother I had grown up with, the person I had trusted to honor our mother's final wishes, had proven himself to be someone I couldn't trust with anything important. The emotional aftermath of the estate battle was complex and long-lasting. While I was grateful to have recovered my inheritance and stopped David's theft, the experience had shattered my remaining illusions about family loyalty and unconditional love. The realization that my brother had been willing to steal from both Mom's estate and my inheritance was deeply traumatic, challenging my fundamental assumptions about family relationships. I used part of the inheritance to take my first real vacation in 15 years, traveling to Europe for 3 weeks to visit places I had dreamed about during the years when I couldn't leave Phoenix for more than a day or two. The trip was emotionally healing, providing distance from the painful memories and space to begin processing the grief and betrayal I had experienced. I also used inheritance funds to make a down payment on a small house in a quiet Phoenix neighborhood, finally achieving the homeownership that had been impossible during my caregiving years. The house represented independence and stability, a tangible symbol of the new life I was building with Mom's final gift. The remaining inheritance money was invested conservatively, providing a financial cushion that allowed me to make career decisions based on personal fulfillment rather than desperate financial need. I was able to leave the newspaper and freelance full-time, writing longer-form articles and eventually beginning work on a book about the experience of caring for aging parents. 6 months after the estate settlement, I received an unexpected call from James, one of David's colleagues at his tech company. James had been a mutual friend during college and had stayed in touch with both of us over the years, though I hadn't spoken to him since Mom's funeral. "I wanted you to know that David was terminated from his position last week," James said carefully. There were irregularities in his expense reports and some questions about personal use of company resources. I thought you should hear it from someone who cares about both of you rather than through gossip. The news wasn't entirely surprising given David's pattern of using other people's money for personal benefit, but it was still shocking to learn that his misconduct extended beyond Mom's estate to his professional life. Apparently, the entitlement and dishonesty he had displayed as executor were characteristic behaviors rather than isolated incidents. James also mentioned that David had been forced to sell both his houses and the Tesla to cover legal expenses and potential financial penalties related to his employment termination. The lifestyle of luxury and success that he had been maintaining was apparently built on borrowed money and misappropriated funds rather than legitimate earnings. He's been asking mutual friends if they know how to get in touch with you, James added. I think he's in pretty desperate financial straits and might be hoping for family help. I wanted to warn you in case he tries to reach out. I thanked James for the information but made it clear that I had no intention of helping David with his financial problems or rebuilding our relationship. He had made his choices and would have to deal with the consequences without expecting rescue from the sister he had tried to steal from. True to James's prediction, David did attempt to contact me several weeks later through a mutual cousin who didn't know about our estate dispute. The cousin passed along a message that David was going through a difficult time and hoped we could talk about family reconciliation. I politely but firmly declined the request, explaining that David had burned bridges that couldn't be rebuilt. The cousin was surprised by my response and pressed for details about what had caused such a permanent rift between siblings. I provided a brief summary of David's theft from Mom's estate and my legal battle to recover the funds, information that quickly spread through our extended family network. The revelation damaged David's reputation within our family circle, with several relatives expressing shock and disappointment about his conduct. Some family members reached out to apologize for not understanding why I had seemed distant from David during recent family gatherings. Others shared their own stories of financial boundary violations and manipulation they had experienced with David over the years. A year after Mom's death, I attended a memorial service organized by her former colleagues at the hospital, where she had worked for so many years. The service was a celebration of her life and career, with dozens of people sharing stories about her kindness, professionalism, and dedication to patient care. Many attendees mentioned the pride she had expressed about both of her children, though several noted that she had talked more frequently about my care during her illness than about David's professional achievements. David did not attend the memorial service, despite being invited by the organizers. His absence was noticed and commented upon by several attendees who remembered him from previous hospital events and social gatherings. I offered no explanation for his absence, but the contrast between my presence and his absence spoke volumes about our respective relationships with Mom and her community. During the service, I spoke briefly about Mom's strength during her illness and her gratitude for the support she had received from her medical colleagues. I mentioned her pride in having worked at the hospital for over 30 years, and her commitment to providing excellent patient care despite her own health challenges. The audience was deeply moved by the stories of her resilience and professionalism. After the service, several of Mom's former colleagues approached me privately to express their concern about David's absence and to share their observations about our family dynamics during Mom's final years. Many had noticed that I was consistently present for Mom's medical appointments and hospitalizations, while David appeared only occasionally, usually during scheduled visits rather than medical crises. One nurse, Maria Santos, had worked closely with Mom for over 20 years and had known our family since David and I were teenagers. Your mother worried about you giving up so much of your life to care for her, Maria confided. She felt guilty about the sacrifices you made, but she was also incredibly proud of your devotion. She used to say that you had inherited her sense of duty and responsibility. Maria's words were both comforting and painful, confirming that Mom had been aware of the sacrifices I had made, but also suggesting that she had worried about the cost to my personal life and career. I wished I could have reassured her that caring for her had been a privilege rather than a burden, despite the challenges and limitations it had imposed. She also worried about David, Maria continued. She loved him dearly, but she recognized that he had never learned to put others' needs before his own. She hoped that her illness might teach him about family responsibility, but I think she knew that some people don't change, even in the face of loss. The insight into Mom's perspective on David was enlightening and sad. She had apparently understood his character limitations, even while continuing to love and hope for him. Her decision to divide her estate equally between us may have reflected love rather than blindness to our different levels of commitment and sacrifice. As I reflected on the years since Mom's death, I realized that the estate battle with David had been about more than just money. It had been about honoring Mom's memory and values, protecting her final wishes from someone who saw her estate as an opportunity for personal gain rather than a sacred trust. My willingness to fight for my inheritance was really a willingness to fight for the principles Mom had tried to instill in both of her children. The inheritance itself had provided financial security and opportunities I hadn't experienced in years, but the real value was symbolic rather than monetary. The money represented Mom's love, her recognition of my sacrifices, and her desire to provide for my future after years of selfless caregiving. David's attempt to steal those funds was an attack on everything Mom had valued and everything she had tried to teach us about family responsibility. I had learned painful but important lessons about the limitations of family loyalty and the necessity of protecting myself from people who would exploit my trust and generosity. The realization that David was capable of stealing from both Mom's estate and my inheritance had been devastating, but it had also been liberating in its clarity. I no longer needed to make excuses for his behavior or hope for changes that would never come. The experience had also reinforced my appreciation for the genuine relationships I had built with friends, colleagues, and community members who had supported me during Mom's illness and after her death. These chosen family members had provided the loyalty, honesty, and mutual support that I had expected from David but never received. 2 years after the estate settlement, I completed my book about the experience of caring for aging parents, incorporating both the practical challenges of medical coordination and the emotional complexities of family dynamics during crisis periods. The book included a chapter about financial elder abuse and the importance of protecting vulnerable adults from family members who might exploit their trust and resources. The publishing process was emotionally challenging because it required revisiting painful memories and examining difficult family relationships with honesty and clarity. But the book also provided an opportunity to honor Mom's memory and to help other caregivers navigate similar challenges with greater awareness and preparation. During book promotion interviews, I was frequently asked about forgiveness and family reconciliation, questions that reflected cultural assumptions about the paramount importance of family relationships regardless of the harm caused by family members. I tried to answer these questions honestly while respecting the complexity of individual situations and the validity of different approaches to family boundary setting. Forgiveness doesn't require continued relationship, I would explain. I have forgiven my brother in the sense of releasing my anger and resentment, but that doesn't mean I'm willing to trust him again or maintain a relationship that would likely involve continued manipulation and boundary violations. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to love someone from a distance while protecting yourself from their harmful behavior. The book was well received by both readers and critics, with many reviewers noting the honest examination of family dynamics and the practical guidance for managing complex caregiving situations. Several readers reached out to share their own stories of family financial abuse and to express gratitude for the validation and guidance the book provided. One particularly moving letter came from a woman whose brother had stolen their father's entire life savings while she was providing hands-on care during his final illness. She had been reluctant to pursue legal action because of family pressure to forgive and move on, but reading about my experience had given her the courage to hold her brother accountable for his theft. Your book helped me understand that protecting my father's final wishes wasn't about money or revenge, she wrote. It was about honoring his values and ensuring that his sacrifices to build that nest egg weren't wasted on someone who saw his illness as an opportunity for personal gain. Thank you for showing me that family loyalty works both ways and that some behaviors are unforgivable regardless of DNA relationships. Letters like these confirmed that David's conduct wasn't unique and that many families struggle with similar dynamics during medical crises and estate settlements. The combination of financial pressure, emotional stress, and unequal caregiving responsibilities creates opportunities for exploitation that some family members are unfortunately willing to pursue. 3 years after Mom's death, I was contacted by a journalist working on an article about financial elder abuse within families. She had read my book and wanted to interview me about the warning signs of family financial exploitation and the challenges of pursuing legal remedies when the perpetrator is a trusted family member. During the interview, I emphasized the importance of maintaining separate financial accounts and clear documentation during estate administration, even when family members seem trustworthy. I also discussed the emotional manipulation tactics that financial abusers often use, including guilt-tripping victims about family loyalty and characterizing theft as temporary borrowing or misunderstanding. The most important thing people need to understand is that financial abuse is about character, not circumstances, I explained. My brother didn't steal from our mother's estate because he was desperate or confused about his responsibilities. He stole because he felt entitled to use other people's money for his own benefit, and he thought he could get away with it because I would prioritize family harmony over financial justice. The journalist also asked about the long-term impact of pursuing legal action against David, including whether I regretted the decision or felt conflicted about the permanent damage to our relationship. I answered honestly that while the legal battle had been emotionally difficult, I had no regrets about protecting Mom's estate and my own inheritance. The relationship was already damaged by his dishonesty and betrayal. I clarified. The legal action didn't destroy our relationship, it simply made visible the damage that his conduct had already caused. I couldn't maintain a relationship based on pretending that his theft was acceptable, or that family loyalty required me to absorb financial harm without resistance. The article was published in a national magazine and generated significant reader response, with many people sharing their own experiences of family financial abuse and expressing gratitude for the practical advice and emotional validation the piece provided. Several readers contacted me directly to ask for guidance about their own situations involving financial exploitation by family members. One reader's situation was particularly similar to my own experience. Her sister had been designated as executor of their mother's estate and had been using estate funds for personal expenses while delaying asset distribution to beneficiaries. The reader had discovered the theft, but was being pressured by other family members to handle the situation privately rather than involving courts or attorneys. I provided detailed advice about documenting the financial misconduct, gathering evidence of personal use of estate funds, and working with qualified attorneys to pursue appropriate legal remedies. I also emphasized the importance of acting quickly to prevent additional theft and to preserve evidence before it could be destroyed or hidden. 6 months later, the reader contacted me again to report that she had successfully recovered the misappropriated funds and had her sister removed as executor. The legal process had been stressful and expensive, but she had recovered not only the stolen money but also additional damages and attorney fees. More importantly, she had protected the remaining estate assets from further theft. Your advice and encouragement gave me the courage to put my mother's wishes ahead of family politics, she wrote. I realized that allowing my sister to steal from the estate would have been a betrayal of my mother's trust, not a demonstration of family loyalty. Thank you for helping me understand that protecting inheritance isn't about greed. It's about honoring the intentions of people who worked hard to provide for their children's futures. As the 5th anniversary of Mom's death approached, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected ways that her loss had transformed my life and clarified my values. The grief of losing her had been profound and lasting, but the experience of fighting for her estate had taught me important lessons about self-advocacy, family boundaries, and the difference between forgiveness and doormat behavior. I had built a fulfilling life as a freelance writer and author, work that provided both financial stability and personal satisfaction. The house I had purchased with inheritance funds had become a peaceful sanctuary where I could write, garden, and entertain the close friends who had supported me through difficult times. I had developed romantic relationships based on mutual respect and shared values rather than the caretaking dynamics that had characterized my 20s and early 30s. Most importantly, I had learned to distinguish between healthy family relationships based on mutual love and respect, and toxic family dynamics based on exploitation and manipulation. The painful experience with David had inoculated me against future attempts at emotional manipulation, and had given me the confidence to establish and maintain appropriate boundaries with people who might try to take advantage of my generosity or sense of family obligation. On the anniversary of Mom's death, I visited her grave for the first time since the funeral. I had avoided the cemetery during the years of estate litigation and emotional processing, but I finally felt ready to honor her memory without the weight of unresolved anger and family conflict. The headstone was simple and elegant, engraved with her name, dates, and a phrase she had often used: "Family is about love, not obligation." The inscription had been David's suggestion during funeral planning, and at the time I had found it meaningful and appropriate. Now, with the perspective of everything that had happened since her death, the words seemed prophetic. Mom had understood that genuine family relationships must be based on love, respect, and mutual care, rather than mere biological connection or social expectations. Her own relationship with our father had ended when his behavior became incompatible with family love and stability. Her different approaches to David and me during her lifetime reflected her recognition that family members have different characters and capabilities. I placed fresh flowers on her grave and spent an hour sitting quietly in the peaceful cemetery, finally able to grieve her loss without the complication of ongoing family conflict. I told her about the book I had written, the life I had built with her, Inheritance, and the hard-won wisdom I had gained about family relationships and personal boundaries. "I protected your wishes, Mom," I said aloud, feeling slightly foolish but needing to vocalize the commitment I had honored. "I didn't let him steal what you intended for me to have. I hope you would be proud of how I handled everything, even though it meant losing the relationship with David that you had hoped we would maintain." As I prepared to leave the cemetery, I noticed a familiar figure approaching Mom's grave from the opposite direction. David walked slowly, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and looking older and more worn than I remembered. He apparently hadn't noticed me sitting nearby, and I had a choice to make in that moment. I could slip away quietly, avoiding what would certainly be an uncomfortable encounter, or I could stay and see what David might say or do at Mom's grave. Something about the way he moved, the slump of his shoulders and the careful way he placed each step, suggested that life had not been kind to him in the years since our legal battle. I decided to remain seated on the bench where I had been sitting, far enough away to give him privacy but close enough to observe his behavior. David approached Mom's headstone slowly, as if unsure of his welcome, even in this place of the dead. He read the inscription carefully, running his fingers over the engraved words about family being founded on love rather than obligation. He placed his flowers next to mine, a simple gesture that somehow felt significant in its timing. Then he did something I had never seen him do during all the years of Mom's illness and death. He knelt beside her grave and began to cry. Not the controlled tears of funeral grief, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from a place of profound regret and loss. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet cemetery air. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry I let you down. I'm sorry I hurt Rachel and damaged everything you tried to teach us about family." His words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were manipulative or calculated, but because they seemed genuine in a way that David's communications had rarely been. The man kneeling at our mother's grave bore little resemblance to the arrogant, entitled person who had stolen from her estate and then tried to gaslight me about his conduct. I remained silent, uncertain whether David was aware of my presence and unsure whether I wanted to reveal myself. Part of me wanted to hear what else he might say when he thought he was alone with Mom's memory. Another part of me felt like I was intruding on a private moment of grief and accountability that he had perhaps never allowed himself to experience. "I know I can't fix what I did," David continued, his voice broken and raw. "I know Rachel will never forgive me, and I don't deserve her forgiveness anyway. I just want you to know that I understand now what I lost. Not just the money, but everything that mattered. The family you worked so hard to build, the values you tried to teach us, the sister who was always better than me." The acknowledgement was stunning in its completeness and honesty. For years, I had wondered whether David truly understood the magnitude of his betrayal, or whether he was simply capable of justifying any behavior that served his interests. Hearing him accept full responsibility for his actions and their consequences was something I had never expected to experience. "She was there for you every day while I was building my career and pretending that mattered more than family," David said, placing his hand on Mom's headstone. "She gave up her dreams to take care of you, and I let her carry that burden alone because it was convenient for me. Then when you died, I stole from the estate like some kind of common thief. I don't know how I became such a selfish person." His words were creating an emotional storm within me. The vindication of hearing him acknowledge my sacrifices and his failures was powerful, but it was accompanied by a grief I hadn't expected. This broken, remorseful person was so different from the brother I had known that it felt like discovering I had lost someone else entirely. I lost my job, my house, everything I thought defined success, David continued. But you know what the worst part is? I deserved all of it. Every bit of the consequences, every relationship I destroyed, every opportunity I lost. I finally understand what you meant when you used to tell us that character matters more than achievement. I found myself crying silently as I listened to David's confession, tears for the brother I had never really known and the relationship we had never been able to build. His words suggested a level of self-awareness and accountability that I had never seen from him during our years of conflict and estrangement. I wish I could tell Rachel how sorry I am, David said, his voice barely audible now. Not because I want anything from her, but because she deserves to know that I finally understand what I did to her and to our family. She was the daughter you deserved, and I was too proud and selfish to see it. The temptation to reveal my presence and respond to his apology was overwhelming, but something held me back. This moment belonged to David and Mom, a reckoning he needed to have without the complication of my immediate forgiveness or judgment. Whatever transformation he was experiencing needed to be complete before any reconciliation between us could be possible. David spent another 20 minutes at Mom's grave, sharing memories of childhood moments, and expressing regret for opportunities missed during her final years. He talked about wanting to be worthy of the love she had given him, and promised to spend the rest of his life trying to honor her memory through better choices and genuine service to others. When he finally stood to leave, he noticed my flowers for the first time and paused to read the card I had attached. The message was simple. "Thank you for everything, Mom. I kept my promise." David stared at the card for a long moment, then looked around the cemetery as if suddenly realizing that I might be nearby. I remained motionless on my bench, partially hidden by a large oak tree, and after a few moments David gathered his composure and walked slowly toward the cemetery exit. I waited until his car had disappeared before approaching Mom's grave again, my mind reeling with everything I had witnessed and overheard. The flowers David had brought were modest but carefully chosen, a mix of her favorite spring blooms arranged with obvious thought and care. There was no elaborate display or expensive arrangement, just a simple gesture of love and remembrance from someone who appeared to have very little money to spend but had invested what he could in honoring her memory. I sat beside Mom's grave for another hour, processing the emotional complexity of discovering that David had apparently undergone a genuine transformation in the years since our legal battle. His acknowledgement of his mistakes and his recognition of my sacrifices felt healing in ways I hadn't expected, even though it came too late to repair our relationship. That evening, I called Maria Rodriguez, the attorney who had helped me recover the stolen inheritance funds. I wanted to discuss the legal and emotional implications of what I had witnessed at the cemetery, and to explore whether David's apparent transformation created any opportunities or obligations for future interaction. "People can change," Maria said thoughtfully after I described David's behavior at Mom's grave. "But change doesn't automatically erase the consequences of past actions or create obligations for victims to forgive and reconcile. The question isn't whether David has learned from his mistakes, but whether you want any kind of relationship with him going forward." Maria's practical perspective was helpful in clarifying my own feelings about the situation. David's apparent remorse and accountability were personally meaningful because they validated my experience and acknowledged the harm he had caused. But his transformation didn't create any obligation for me to rebuild a relationship that had been fundamentally damaged by his choices. "What would you want from a relationship with David if you decided to pursue one?" Maria asked. "And what would be the potential costs and benefits of re-engaging with him after years of necessary distance?" The questions forced me to think carefully about my motivations and expectations. Did I want to reconnect with David because I missed having a brother, or because I felt guilty about his apparent suffering? Was I hoping for a genuine relationship based on mutual respect and shared values? Or was I simply responding to the novelty of hearing him accept responsibility for his behavior? I realized that I needed time to process these questions before making any decisions about future contact with David. The pain of his betrayal had healed during our years of separation, and I had built a fulfilling life without him. Any decision to re-engage would need to be based on clear thinking about my own needs and boundaries rather than emotional response to his apparent transformation. Several weeks later, I received an unexpected package in the mail with David's return address. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000, along with a handwritten letter that explained his motivation for the payment. "Dear Rachel," the letter began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to send you this money as part of making amends for what I did to Mom's estate. When I provided the accounting during our legal settlement, I wasn't completely honest about all the money I had taken. This check represents the additional funds I stole but didn't admit to at the time." The letter continued with a detailed accounting of the additional estate funds he had misappropriated, along with interest calculations and an explanation of how he had managed to save the money for repayment despite his financial difficulties. He had apparently been working multiple jobs and living in extremely modest circumstances to accumulate the funds needed for complete restitution. "I'm not sending this money because I want anything from you or because I think it will fix our relationship," David wrote. "I'm sending it because Mom trusted me to handle her estate properly, and I violated that trust. This money belongs to you according to her wishes, and keeping it would be continuing the theft I began after her death." The letter also included an apology that was comprehensive and specific, acknowledging not only the financial theft, but also the emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and family damage his conduct had caused. David took full responsibility for his choices and their consequences without making excuses or asking for forgiveness. "I understand that you will probably never want to see me again, and I accept that as a natural consequence of my behavior," the letter concluded. "I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did wrong, and why it was so harmful. I hope you have built a good life with the inheritance Mom intended for you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to make this right." The letter and payment were overwhelming in their implications. David's willingness to track down and repay money that I had written off years earlier suggested that his transformation was genuine and comprehensive, rather than a temporary response to consequences. The fact that he had sacrificed significantly to make complete restitution indicated a level of commitment to accountability that I hadn't thought him capable of achieving. I deposited the check and filed the letter in the folder, where I kept important documents related to Mom's estate and our legal battle. The money was welcome but not necessary for my financial stability, and I decided to donate it to a nonprofit organization that provided support services for family caregivers of chronically ill patients. The donation felt appropriate as a way to honor both Mom's memory and the positive aspects of David's apparent transformation, while maintaining the boundaries I had established to protect myself from future manipulation or disappointment. I wasn't ready to rebuild a relationship with David, but I could acknowledge his efforts to make amends without compromising my own emotional well-being. 6 months later, I was contacted by a social worker named Jennifer Walsh, who worked with a nonprofit organization focused on financial literacy and elder abuse prevention. Jennifer had read my book and wanted to invite me to speak at a conference for family caregivers about recognizing and preventing financial exploitation by family members. "We're particularly interested in your perspective because you were willing to pursue legal action against a family member," Jennifer explained. "Many victims of family financial abuse never seek help because they're afraid of damaging family relationships, or because they feel guilty about holding relatives accountable for theft." I agreed to speak at the conference, viewing it as an opportunity to help other people avoid or address situations similar to what I had experienced with David. The presentation would focus on practical strategies for protecting vulnerable adults from family financial abuse and the importance of pursuing appropriate legal remedies when theft occurs. As I prepared for the presentation, I researched current statistics on elder financial abuse and was shocked to learn that family members are responsible for the majority of financial exploitation cases involving older adults. The emotional manipulation and trust violations that I had experienced with David were apparently common features of family financial abuse, with perpetrators often using guilt, obligation, and family loyalty to discourage victims from seeking help. The conference presentation was well received, with many attendees sharing their own experiences of financial exploitation by family members and expressing gratitude for practical guidance about legal options and protective strategies. During the question and answer session, several people asked about forgiveness and family reconciliation, themes that seemed to resonate with audiences whenever I discussed David's conduct. Forgiveness is a personal choice that should be made for your own emotional well-being, not because others expect it, or because family relationships are supposed to be unconditional, I explained. In my case, I have forgiven my brother in the sense of releasing anger and resentment that was harmful to my own peace of mind. But forgiveness doesn't require continued relationship or trust. One attendee asked whether I would ever consider rebuilding a relationship with David if he continued to demonstrate accountability and positive change. The question was one I had been asking myself since receiving his letter and repayment, but I still didn't have a clear answer. I think that would depend on many factors, I replied honestly. The length of time he sustains positive changes, whether he continues to respect the boundaries I've established, and whether I reach a point where I want a brother relationship badly enough to risk the potential for future disappointment or manipulation. After the conference, Jennifer Walsh and I continued to correspond about elder abuse prevention and family caregiver support issues. She mentioned that her organization was developing educational materials for families about estate planning and administration, and she asked whether I would be willing to review content related to executor responsibilities and beneficiary rights. The materials were comprehensive and practical, covering topics like the importance of clear documentation, the legal requirements for estate administration, and the warning signs of executor misconduct. I suggested additional sections on emotional manipulation tactics and the challenges of pursuing legal remedies against family members, based on my experience with David's conduct in our legal battle. Your case is actually quite typical in terms of the perpetrator's behavior patterns, Jennifer noted during one of our conversations. The entitlement, the rationalization of theft as temporary borrowing, the attempts to manipulate victims through guilt and family loyalty. These are common features of family. Financial abuse that we see repeatedly. The observation was both validating and depressing, confirming that David's conduct hadn't been unique or personally motivated, but rather part of a broader pattern of exploitation that occurs when opportunity meets character deficits. Understanding the systemic nature of family financial abuse helped me feel less personally responsible for David's choices and more confident about the boundaries I had established. A year after receiving David's letter and repayment, I was surprised to see him mentioned in a local newspaper article about volunteer efforts to support homeless veterans. According to the article, David had been working with a nonprofit organization for several months, providing technology training and job placement assistance to veterans transitioning from military service to civilian employment. The article included a brief quote from David about his motivation for volunteer work. I spent years focused solely on my own success and advancement, but I learned that real fulfillment comes from serving others who need support and advocacy. These veterans gave so much for our country, and helping them navigate civilian employment is a small way to give back to people who deserve our gratitude and assistance. The work seemed genuine and consistent with the accountability David had expressed in his letter to me. It also represented a significant change from the self-centered lifestyle he had maintained throughout his tech career, when his free time had been devoted to expensive hobbies and social activities rather than community service. I found myself curious about David's current life and circumstances, wondering whether his volunteer work was part of a sustained transformation or a temporary response to his professional and financial setbacks. The newspaper article provided few personal details, but it suggested that he was living modestly and focusing his time and energy on helping others rather than rebuilding his former lifestyle. The curiosity was emotionally complicated because it indicated that I still cared about David's well-being despite the boundaries I had established to protect myself from future harm. The protective anger that had sustained me during our legal battle and the early years of estrangement had faded, leaving room for more complex feelings about his apparent efforts to rebuild his character and life purpose. 2 years after the cemetery encounter I had witnessed but never acknowledged, I received another letter from David. This one was shorter and less focused on apology, instead providing an update on his life and expressing hope that I was doing well in my own endeavors. I wanted you to know that I'm still working to become the person Mom tried to raise me to be, David wrote. I've been volunteering with Veterans Services for over a year now, and I recently started a small nonprofit focused on technology training for people transitioning out of homelessness. The work is more meaningful than anything I did during my corporate career. The letter mentioned that David was living in a small apartment and working part-time for a local nonprofit while building his own organization. He had apparently chosen to remain in a modest lifestyle rather than pursuing lucrative employment opportunities, focusing instead on work that served others, rather than advancing his personal financial interests. "I think about you often and hope you've been able to build the life you always deserved," David continued. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I want you to know that understanding what I lost when I destroyed our relationship has been one of the most important lessons of my adult life." The letter concluded with information about David's nonprofit organization and an invitation for me to learn more about his work if I was interested, but without any pressure for personal contact or relationship rebuilding. The approach felt respectful of my boundaries while providing an opportunity for limited engagement if I chose to pursue it. I spent several weeks thinking about how to respond to David's letter, if at all. The respectful tone and focus on his work rather than personal reconciliation felt different from his previous attempts at manipulation and control. His sustained commitment to community service and modest lifestyle suggested that his transformation might be genuine and permanent rather than temporary or strategic. Eventually, I decided to visit the website of David's nonprofit organization to learn more about his work and assess whether his claims about community service were accurate. The website was professional but modest, focusing on program outcomes and client success stories rather than fundraising appeals or personal recognition for the founder. The organization, called Bridge Tech, provided technology training and job placement assistance to people experiencing homelessness or housing instability. The programs were designed to help participants develop marketable skills in basic computer usage, digital literacy, and entry-level technical support roles that could provide pathways to stable employment and housing. Client testimonials on the website told compelling stories of people who had gained employment and housing stability through Bridge Tech's programs. The testimonials mentioned David by name, describing him as a patient and dedicated instructor who had helped them navigate both technical training and job search processes with dignity and respect. One testimonial particularly caught my attention. "David never made me feel ashamed about my circumstances or like I was taking charity. He treated me like someone with potential who just needed the right tools and support to succeed. That respect and belief in my abilities made all the difference in my willingness to stick with the program and believe in myself." The description aligned with the accountability and empathy David had expressed in his letters to me, suggesting that his transformation extended beyond personal remorse to genuine care for others who needed support and advocacy. The work seemed to represent a fundamental shift in his values and priorities, rather than a superficial attempt at image rehabilitation. I found myself impressed by the scope and apparent effectiveness of David's nonprofit work, particularly given his lack of previous experience in social services or community organizing. Building a successful program from scratch while living on limited income demonstrated a level of commitment and sacrifice that contradicted his former patterns of entitlement and self-centeredness. After reviewing the website and thinking carefully about my own motivations and boundaries, I decided to send a brief email to David acknowledging his letter and his work with Bridge Tech. I kept the message neutral and focused on his professional accomplishments rather than personal relationship issues. "David," I wrote, "I received your letter and visited the Bridge Tech website to learn about your work. The programs look comprehensive and effective, and the client testimonials suggest that you're making a real difference in people's lives. I'm glad you found meaningful work that serves others who need support and advocacy." I concluded the email by mentioning my own work with elder abuse prevention and caregiver support, providing a parallel update about my life and activities, without inviting personal conversation or relationship discussion. The message felt appropriate, as a way to acknowledge David's positive changes, while maintaining the emotional distance I needed to protect my own well-being. David's response came within a few days and was equally professional and respectful in tone. He thanked me for taking the time to review his organization's work and expressed admiration for my own advocacy efforts with family caregivers and elder abuse prevention. "It sounds like you're helping people navigate some of the same family dynamics and financial exploitation that we experienced," David wrote. "That takes courage and insight that I certainly didn't possess when I was the one causing harm, rather than trying to prevent it." The acknowledgement of the parallel between his current work and my advocacy efforts was thoughtful, and demonstrated continuing self-awareness about his past conduct. David's ability to connect his current service work to the harm he had caused our family suggested that his transformation was integrated and comprehensive, rather than compartmentalized. The email exchange felt like a tentative first step towards some form of ongoing contact, though I remained uncertain about whether I wanted to develop any kind of relationship with David beyond occasional professional updates. The years of distance had allowed me to build a fulfilling life without him, and I was reluctant to risk that stability for an uncertain outcome. Over the following months, David and I exchanged occasional emails about our respective work, sharing resources and insights about nonprofit management, community advocacy, and family dynamics issues. The correspondence was professional and respectful, focused on our work rather than personal history or relationship rebuilding. The exchanges gradually helped me develop a more complete picture of David's current life and values. His nonprofit work was apparently consuming most of his time and energy, with David working long hours for minimal compensation to serve clients who had few other support options. He had apparently chosen purpose over profit in a way that contradicted everything about his former corporate lifestyle. I found myself beginning to respect the person David appeared to have become, even while remaining cautious about the possibility of future manipulation or disappointment. His sustained commitment to community service and modest lifestyle suggested that his transformation might be permanent, but I had learned through painful experience that people could revert to harmful patterns when circumstances changed. 3 years after our first tentative email exchange, David invited me to attend a fundraising event for Bridge Tech, explaining that the organization needed community support to expand its programs and serve more clients. The invitation was carefully worded to avoid pressure, emphasizing that he would understand completely if I preferred not to attend. "The event is really about the clients and their success stories," David wrote. "If you're interested in learning more about the work or meeting some of the people who have benefited from the programs, you're welcome to attend. But there's no expectation or pressure, and I completely respect your boundaries regardless of what you decide." The invitation represented a significant decision point in our tentative reconnection. Attending the event would involve seeing David in person for the first time since Mom's funeral, and potentially beginning a more substantial relationship. Declining would likely signal that I preferred to maintain our current level of limited contact indefinitely. I spent considerable time thinking about the invitation and discussing it with close friends who had supported me through the years of estrangement from David. Their perspectives varied, with some encouraging me to take the risk of deeper engagement, and others warning about the potential for renewed manipulation or disappointment. Ultimately, I decided to attend the fundraising event, motivated more by curiosity about David's work than by desire for family reconciliation. I wanted to see firsthand whether his community service was as comprehensive and effective as his correspondence suggested, and whether his apparent transformation was visible in his interactions with clients and colleagues. The event was held at a community center in a modest neighborhood, with simple decorations and homemade food, rather than the elaborate catering and expensive venues that characterized most nonprofit fundraisers I had attended. The atmosphere was warm and informal, with clients, volunteers, and community supporters mingling easily and sharing stories about the program's impact. I arrived early and positioned myself where I could observe David's interactions without being immediately visible to him. What I saw was revealing and impressive. David moved easily among clients and supporters, listening more than talking, asking thoughtful questions about people's experiences and goals, and demonstrating genuine interest in their success and well-being. His interactions with Bridge Tech clients were particularly striking. David treated each person with obvious respect and dignity, regardless of their current housing status or employment situation. He remembered details about their training progress and job search activities, offering encouragement and practical assistance without condescension or judgment. When David eventually noticed my presence, his reaction was restrained and appropriate. He acknowledged me with a brief nod and smile but didn't interrupt his conversation with the client to approach me. His focus remained on the event and the people it was designed to serve, rather than on managing our personal interaction. During the program portion of the evening, several Bridge Tech clients spoke about their experiences with the organization and their progress towards stable employment and housing. Their testimonials were powerful and specific, describing not only the technical skills they had gained, but also the confidence and hope that David's program had helped them develop. One speaker, a military veteran named Carlos who had experienced homelessness for several years after leaving the service, credited Bridge Tech with helping him transition from street survival mode to productive employment and stable housing. "David and the whole team treated me like someone with value and potential," Carlos said. "They never gave up on me even when I had given up on myself." Another speaker, a woman named Sandra who had lost her housing due to medical bankruptcy, described how Bridge Tech's programs had helped her gain employment in customer service and rebuild her financial stability. "David taught me that my circumstances didn't define my worth or my possibilities," Sandra explained. "He helped me see that I could create a different future through hard work and the right support." The testimonials were emotionally powerful and clearly authentic, describing specific ways that David's organization had helped real people overcome significant challenges and achieve meaningful progress. The speakers' obvious affection and respect for David suggested that his transformation was visible and consistent in his daily interactions with clients. During the networking portion of the evening, I had conversations with several Bridge Tech volunteers and board members who shared their observations about David's leadership and commitment to the organization's mission. Their perspectives were uniformly positive, describing David as dedicated, humble, and genuinely focused on client outcomes rather than personal recognition or career advancement. "David works harder than anyone and takes the smallest salary," one board member told me. "He could easily get a high-paying corporate job with his background, but he's chosen to stay with this work because he believes in the mission. It's rare to see someone so committed to serving others rather than advancing their own interests." The observation aligned with everything I had observed about David's current lifestyle and priorities. His choice to maintain modest living conditions while building a successful nonprofit organization suggested that his transformation involved fundamental changes in his values and definition of success. Near the end of the evening, David approached me during a quiet moment when we wouldn't be interrupting other conversations or drawing attention to our interaction. His manner was respectful and somewhat tentative, clearly uncertain about my comfort level with personal conversation. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said simply. "It means a lot that you took the time to learn about the work, especially given everything that happened between us." "The program is impressive," I replied honestly. "The clients clearly respect and appreciate what you're doing for them." "They're doing the real work," David said. "I'm just trying to provide tools and support for people who have the courage to rebuild their lives despite difficult circumstances. It's taught me a lot about resilience and determination." The conversation was brief and focused on his work rather than our personal relationship, but it felt comfortable and genuine in a way that our interactions had rarely been during our childhood and young adult years. David seemed more grounded and authentic than I remembered, less concerned with impression management and more focused on substantive communication. As I prepared to leave the event, David thanked me again for attending and mentioned that he hoped we might be able to maintain some level of contact going forward, if I was comfortable with that possibility. His approach was respectful of my boundaries while expressing openness to whatever level of relationship I might be willing to consider. "I understand that I forfeited the right to a close relationship when I betrayed your trust and stole from Mom's estate," David said. "But I hope that maybe someday we can find a way to be in each other's lives in some capacity, even if it's different from what we might have had before." His acknowledgement of the consequences of his past behavior and his realistic expectations about our potential future relationship felt mature and appropriate. David seemed to understand that rebuilding trust would require sustained demonstration of changed behavior rather than apologies or promises about future conduct. I left the fundraising event with complex and conflicted feelings about David and the possibility of developing some form of ongoing relationship. His transformation appeared to be genuine and comprehensive, involving not only personal accountability, but also sustained commitment to serving others in meaningful ways. The respect and affection expressed by his clients and colleagues suggested that his changed behavior was consistent and reliable, rather than performative or temporary. At the same time, I remained cautious about the risks of renewed engagement with someone who had caused such significant harm to our family and my personal well-being. The years of distance had allowed me to heal from his betrayal and build a fulfilling life without the complications of family drama and manipulation. Any decision to develop a closer relationship would need to be carefully considered in light of both the potential benefits and the possible costs. Over the following months, David and I continued our pattern of occasional email correspondence, but with slightly more personal content and warmth than had characterized our earlier exchanges. I shared updates about my writing projects and advocacy work, while he provided news about BridgeTech's program expansion and client success stories. The correspondence felt natural and comfortable, focused on our respective work and interests rather than family history or relationship negotiation. David continued to demonstrate respect for my boundaries and realistic expectations about the pace and scope of any potential reconnection between us. 6 months after the fundraising event, I made a decision that surprised even me. I invited David to have coffee with me during a business trip that brought him to Phoenix for a nonprofit conference. The invitation felt like a natural next step in our gradual reconnection, an opportunity to have a more substantial conversation than our brief interaction at the BridgeTech event had allowed. David accepted the invitation with obvious pleasure, but without overwhelming enthusiasm or expectations about what the meeting might represent for our future relationship. His response was appropriately measured, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to spend time together while maintaining realistic expectations about outcomes. We met at a quiet coffee shop near the conference venue, choosing a neutral location that would allow for private conversation without the pressure of a formal or emotionally charged setting. David arrived early and had already ordered coffee for both of us, a small gesture that demonstrated thoughtfulness without being presumptuous about my preferences. The conversation began with safe topics: our respective work, the challenges of nonprofit management, and the satisfaction of helping people overcome difficult circumstances. David was genuinely interested in my writing and advocacy efforts, asking thoughtful questions about my experience with family caregivers and elder abuse prevention work. As we became more comfortable with each other, the conversation gradually turned to more personal topics, including our memories of Mom and her influence on our respective paths. David spoke eloquently about the lessons he had learned from her example of service and sacrifice, acknowledging that it had taken him far too long to understand and apply those lessons in his own life. Mom always said that character was more important than achievement, David reflected. I spent years thinking I understood what she meant, but I was actually prioritizing achievement while ignoring character completely. It wasn't until I lost everything that I began to understand what she was really trying to teach us. His insight about Mom's values and his own misguided priorities felt authentic and demonstrated genuine understanding of the fundamental errors that had led to his betrayal of our family. David seemed to recognize that his theft from the estate had been a symptom of deeper character problems rather than an isolated mistake or momentary lapse in judgment. We also discussed the impact of his actions on our relationship and my decision to pursue legal remedies rather than accepting his manipulation and theft. David expressed genuine remorse for the harm he had caused and acknowledged that my legal action had been necessary and appropriate given his conduct. I was angry about the lawsuit at the time because it forced me to face consequences I didn't want to accept, David admitted. But I understand now that you were protecting Mom's wishes and your own future. I should have been grateful that you cared enough about her estate to fight for it when I was failing in my responsibilities as executor. The acknowledgement of my motivations and the legitimacy of my legal action felt validating and healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. For years, I had occasionally wondered whether I had been too harsh in pursuing court action against my brother, but David's recognition that my response had been appropriate and necessary confirmed that I had made the right choice under difficult circumstances. As our coffee meeting drew to a close, David made a suggestion that took me by surprise. I know this might be premature, but I wonder if you would ever be interested in visiting Mom's grave together. I've been going there regularly for the past few years, and I think she would be happy to know that we were able to spend time together without anger or resentment. The suggestion was emotionally charged because it would involve returning to the place where I had witnessed David's private confession and accountability, though he remained unaware of my presence during that moment. The idea of visiting Mom's grave together felt like a significant step toward reconciliation, but also potentially overwhelming given the emotional weight of that location for both of us. I'd like to think about that, I replied. It's a meaningful suggestion. but I want to be sure I'm ready for the emotional complexity of sharing that space with you. David accepted my response with understanding and patience, emphasizing that the invitation would remain open whenever I felt ready to consider it. His willingness to wait for my comfort level rather than pushing for immediate resolution felt respectful and demonstrated continued recognition of my need for control over the pace of our potential reconciliation. I left the coffee meeting with a sense of cautious optimism about the possibility of developing some form of ongoing relationship with David. His transformation appeared to be genuine and sustained, involving not only personal accountability but also fundamental changes in his values and life priorities. The respect and patience he had shown regarding my boundaries and emotional needs suggested that he understood the work required to rebuild trust between us. At the same time, I remained realistic about the limitations and risks of renewed family connection. David had caused significant harm through his theft and manipulation, and while he had apparently learned from those mistakes, there was always the possibility of future disappointment or conflict. Any relationship we developed would need to be built slowly and carefully, with clear boundaries and realistic expectations about what we could and couldn't provide for each other. 3 months after our coffee meeting, I decided I was ready to visit Mom's grave with David. I contacted him to accept his invitation, and we arranged to meet at the cemetery on the anniversary of Mom's death, a date that felt symbolically appropriate for whatever reconciliation or closure we might achieve together. The visit was emotional and meaningful in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Standing beside Mom's grave with David, I felt a complex mixture of grief, forgiveness, and cautious hope for our future relationship. David's presence at that sacred space felt different from our previous interactions, more genuine and less complicated by the defensive posturing that had characterized our communication for so many years. We stood together in comfortable silence for several minutes before David spoke. "I come here when I need to remember what really matters," he said quietly. She always knew the difference between success and significance, even when I was too proud and selfish to listen. "She loved us both," I replied, "even when we disappointed her or failed to live up to her expectations. I think she would be glad that we're here together." As we prepared to leave the cemetery, David made one final statement that felt like a completion of his accountability process and an opening toward whatever future relationship we might build. "I can't change what I did to our family or undo the pain I caused you," he said, "but I want you to know that losing your trust and respect was the greatest consequence of my actions, greater than any financial or professional losses I experienced. Having this conversation today feels like a gift I don't deserve but will always treasure." His words brought tears to my eyes, not because they erased the harm he had caused, but because they demonstrated genuine understanding of what he had lost and why it mattered. For the first time since Mom's death, I felt like I was talking to someone who truly grasped the magnitude of his betrayal and the value of what we might be able to rebuild together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.